My name is Karen, and I'm 34 years old. I'm a chef. The woman who taught me every knife skill I have is my grandmother, Harriet. On her 79th birthday, my parents left her a grocery store frozen dinner still cold in the middle, dropped it on the same kitchen table that once fed half the town, then drove straight to the airport and flew to Aspen for my sister's engagement party. They didn't even stay long enough to watch her open the box. I stayed. I lit the candles myself. I held her hand while she cried in a kitchen that used to smell like the best food in the county. The next morning, 2 men knocked on her door with a thick folder. One placed a pen in front of her. The other looked at me and said 6 words I still hear. "You should sit down for this." They had no idea what my grandmother had already decided. And my parents were about to learn, in the most public way possible, exactly what it costs to treat a lifetime of real food like it was disposable. If you've ever watched your family treat the person who raised them like an inconvenience, subscribe right now and comment what city you're watching from. What I'm about to tell you isn't just my story. It's a warning. Let me take you back to the morning it started. Before the men, before the folder, before any of us knew what was inside it. It was the 14th of March. I was elbow deep in lunch prep at the restaurant where I run the kitchen in Columbus when my phone lit up on the steel counter. The family group chat. 6 messages in a row. My mother, Cheryl, had posted a photo of a boarding gate. My father, Dennis, had posted a thumbs up. My sister, Sloan, had posted a mountain and 3 hearts. Then one message that wasn't a photo. My mother to me, private. "We left Grandma a dinner, don't make a thing of it." I read it twice. I read it a 3rd time while a pot behind me hissed over. "Don't make a thing of it." As if the thing were mine to make, and not theirs. It was Grandma's birthday, her 79th, and they had gotten on a plane to Colorado for Sloan's engagement party, a party planned for a full week under the mountains, and they had left my grandmother a boxed dinner and a printed card. I want you to understand that this did not surprise me. That's the part that took me years to admit. It didn't surprise me at all. It only clarified something I had spent a long time trying not to see. I took off my apron. I told my sous chef I'd be back for dinner service, and I drove the 35 miles from Columbus to Marysville with my hands too tight on the wheel. I had made that drive 100 times. I made it the day her furnace died in January 2 winters ago, when my parents were on a cruise, and I left work to sit with her in the cold until the repairman came. I made it the morning of her cataract surgery, when I signed the forms in the beige waiting room as her emergency contact. Because I was always her emergency contact. Sloan was the one they flew to Aspen for. I was the one they texted when something needed doing. The Bluebird was closed by then, but Grandma still lived in the house behind it, the house my grandfather Earl built when I was small. When I pulled into the drive, the kitchen light was on. The front door was unlocked. It was always unlocked. For 31 years, that door never locked before dawn. She was in the kitchen, and on the table, right in the center of it, sat a frozen dinner. Salisbury steak, microwave 6 minutes. Still in the box, still frozen. They hadn't even heated it. They'd set it down and left. Stuck to the lid was the grocery receipt, and I don't know why I looked at it, except that a cook looks at everything. The receipt was time-stamped that morning, 7:52. They had been here at 7:52, in this house, and by mid-morning they were at a boarding gate posting mountains. Next to the box was a card. One of those pre-printed ones, glittered, generic. "Happy birthday," signed in 2 quick scrawls, the kind you sign in a moving car so you can hand it off and be done. "It's fine," Grandma said, when she saw me looking. She was wearing her good dress, the navy one, with the buttons she saves for weddings and funerals. "They're busy people." She glanced at the clock on the stove. Then, a minute later, she glanced at it again. I noticed it, and I filed it away as nerves. I was wrong about what it was, but I was right that it meant something. I need to explain my place in this family, because it matters for everything that comes after. I was the one they called when the water heater broke. I was the emergency contact on Grandma's chart at the clinic. When Sloan went to college, my parents paid for it and threw her a party. When I went, I worked 2 jobs and nobody came to my graduation because it fell on a weekend Sloan had a recital. That's not bitterness. That's just the arithmetic of my childhood. Sloan was the one they invited to things. I was the one they called when something needed doing. I never said any of that out loud. I'd made a kind of peace with it, the way you make peace with a knee that aches before rain. Grandma reached over and put her hand on my wrist. Her hands were the first thing she ever taught me with. She used to stand behind me at the Bluebird's cutting board when I was 9 and fold her fingers over mine and show me how to hold a knife so it never slipped. "You always come," she said now. I noticed. My phone buzzed. The group chat again. My mother. Another photo. The lodge, a long table. Champagne. My sister glowing in the center of maybe 120 people. "First night of the best week ever," my mother had written. Under the mountains, 1,500 miles away, it was the best week ever. In this kitchen, it was a frozen box and a woman in her funeral dress. I turned the phone face down on the counter. I looked at my grandmother at a table set with a frozen box, and I made a decision that felt very small at the time. "Let's do your birthday properly," I said. There was half a chocolate cake in her refrigerator, the kind from the good bakery in town, which told me she'd bought it herself. For herself. Expecting company. That detail is the one that still gets me. She had bought her own birthday cake. I found a box of candles in the drawer where she keeps string and rubber bands. Then I cooked. I made the thing she taught me first. The thing that put the Bluebird on the map. The chicken and the gravy and the biscuits that regulars used to drive an hour for. And I did it from memory because she'd made me learn it by hand and not by paper. The whole house started to smell like it used to smell. She sat at the table and watched me work, and for a little while she looked less like a woman who'd been left behind and more like a woman in her own kitchen, in charge of it, at home in it. "Your grandfather couldn't make that gravy to save his life," she said and almost smiled. "He'd let it break every time. You never let it break." "You wouldn't let me leave the stove until I got it," I said. "No," she agreed. "I wouldn't." The first thing she ever taught me was how to hold a knife. I was 9. She stood behind me at the Bluebird's cutting board and folded her hand over mine and moved it slow, the way you'd teach a child to write. And she told me a knife was honest, that it did exactly what your hand told it and nothing more, and that most of cooking was just paying attention. My mother had dropped me at the diner for the afternoon because she had somewhere to be, the way she always had somewhere to be. My grandmother turned an inconvenience into the best afternoon of my childhood. I didn't know it then, but she was already deciding something about me. She just let it look like an ordinary Tuesday. I lit the candles. Not all 79. A handful? Enough. "Make a wish, Grandma," I said. "A real one." She looked at the little flames for a long moment. Then she blew them out. "I already made it come true," she said. "You'll see." I didn't ask what she meant. I thought it was the kind of thing you say over a cake. After we ate, she stood up slower than she used to and went to the built-in hutch in the dining room. She opened the bottom drawer, the one that locks, and took out a notebook. Blue cover, soft with age, the corners rounded from decades of hands. I knew that notebook. Every cook who ever worked at the Bluebird knew that notebook, and none of them was ever allowed to touch it. She set it on the table between us and opened it part way. Recipes in her handwriting, page after page, some of them older than my mother. Grease had marked a few of the pages into transparency. There were notes in the margins in pencil, corrections, a temperature crossed out and rewritten, a date, a name. "Make this for Earl on his birthday." It was less a cookbook than a life, written in the only language she'd ever fully trusted. "Everything I am is in here," she said. She rested her palm flat on the open page. Not everyone deserves it. She let me look for a minute. Then she closed it, and she put it back in the locked drawer, and she kept the key separate in her cardigan pocket, the way you keep something you don't intend to lose. We sat a while longer, and then, without warning, she started to cry. Not loud. My grandmother has never in her life cried loud, just tears running down a face that had spent 79 years not letting anyone see it do that. I took her hand across the table, and I didn't say any of the useless things. I didn't tell her it was okay, because it wasn't. I'm not crying because they left, she said finally, wiping her face with the back of her wrist. I'm crying because you came. I have thought about that sentence more times than I can count. She squeezed my hand and her voice changed. Steadier. Stay for breakfast, she said. Someone's coming in the morning. Coming for what? For the thing I've been waiting to finish. She wouldn't say more. She got up, rinsed her cup, and told me the guest room was made up. And I stayed. Because I always stayed. And because something in the way she'd said finish made me not want to leave her alone with it. I slept badly. The house made the sounds it makes. The ticking of the water pipes, the settling of old wood. And I lay awake in the room I'd slept in as a child, and listened to all of it. And in the gray part of the morning, when I was standing at the window with a cup of coffee I hadn't tasted, I saw a car I didn't recognize pull up to the house. 2 men got out, dark suits, out-of-state plates on the car. One of them carried a folder thick enough to be a book. They came up the porch steps, and they knocked. I opened the door because Grandma was still at the stove. The first man was younger, precise, with the kind of watch that means the watch is the point. Mrs. Hills? He said, looking past me. We spoke on the phone. I'm Miles Hartwell. She's in the kitchen, I said. I didn't move out of the doorway. Who are you? The second man answered. He was older, gray at the temples, and there was something in his face that didn't match the suit. Something almost tender. He held out a card. Dalton Pierce, he said. Ashford Foods. I knew the name Ashford. Everyone who buys groceries knows the name Ashford. I stood there in the doorway of my grandmother's house trying to build a bridge in my head between a national food company and a closed diner in Marysville, and I couldn't find the span. Grandma came to the doorway drying her hands on a towel, calm as still water. Come in, she said. Karen, put on more coffee. Pierce stepped inside and looked around the kitchen the way you look at a room you've been in before, a long time ago. Your grandmother asked us to do this quietly, he said to me, while the family was away. There's a reason for that, and it isn't mine to tell. He glanced at the blue door frame, the coat hooks, the corner where the light came in. I grew up 2 streets from this diner. My mother worked doubles, and this is where she brought me for supper when there was nothing at home. He looked at Harriet with something that took me a second to recognize as gratitude. You made me a grilled cheese once when I couldn't pay for it. Told me to fix the sign out front and we'd call it square. I've never forgotten it. Hartwell set the folder on the kitchen table and opened it. It was full of tabs, colored plastic tabs down the side, a document as thick as a phone book. My grandmother sat down across from it like she'd been expecting it her whole life, like it was the last course of a very long meal. Everything's as we discussed, Hartwell said. 2 signatures today. He uncapped a pen and set it on the table next to her hand. Pierce turned to me for the first time. He looked at me a beat too long, and then he said the 6 words. You should sit down for this. A pause. It concerns you more than you think. I sat down. My grandmother picked up the pen and held it over the first page. Then she stopped. She looked at me, and for once she looked her age, and there was something under the calm that I'd never seen there before. Something like apology. I should have told you sooner, she said. She touched the first page. This is the Bluebird. She moved her finger to a second page, a single sheet with its own tab. "And this," she said, "is about you." My phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it. Later, I'd see it was Sloan. 3 words. "Are you at Grandma's?" But right then I couldn't have looked away from that table if the house were on fire. Hartwell talked, and I made myself listen instead of spinning, because a kitchen teaches you to slow down when everything is happening at once. Ashford wasn't buying the building, he said. They weren't even really buying the diner. "We're not buying a diner," he said. "We're buying what made it a diner. The Bluebird brand. The name. And a license to the recipes. My grandmother's recipes, to develop into a retail line that would carry her name onto shelves she would probably never stand behind." He said numbers, 2.8 million up front. A structure of royalties on top that could bring it, over time, to somewhere near 3.6. He said it the way you'd say the weather, because to him, it was the weather. To me, it was a sound I felt in my teeth. My grandmother, who cooked for 31 years in a diner where a full breakfast cost less than a movie ticket, did not blink at $3.6 million. She had already known. She'd known for months. She had sat across from me at Sunday dinners with this number in her pocket and let my parents call her a burden. "The money is a tool," she said to me quietly, while Hartwell squared his papers. "The recipes are the point." Then Pierce slid the single-tabbed sheet toward me, and I read the line at the top, and the kitchen went very far away. "Custodian of recipes, Karen Hills." "What is this?" I said. It didn't come out as a question. I didn't have the breath for a question. "It's a role," Hartwell said. "Your grandmother's condition of the sale. The recipes get licensed, but they stay tended by a person Ashford recognizes and consults on every product that carries her name. She named you, the keeper. The one who makes sure it's still hers when it hits a package. It's not ceremonial. It comes with a seat and a say." I looked at my grandmother. "Why me?" She didn't reach for a speech. She never does. "Because I taught you with my hands, not with the book," she said. "Sloan can sell anything. You can make it real. That's the rarer thing, and it's the only thing that keeps this from turning into just another box on a shelf with a stranger's face on it." I want to be honest about what I felt, because it wasn't triumph. It was closer to vertigo. For 34 years I had been the one who came, the one who did, the one nobody thought to invite. And now the one person in this family who had watched me the whole time had written my name onto the thing she loved most, and I did not know how to stand up under it. I thought about all the mornings I'd stood at that cutting board with her hands over mine. I understood for the first time that she hadn't been passing time with a bored granddaughter. She'd been choosing a successor and letting me think it was just love. It was both. I thought about every Sunday I'd spent in her kitchen while my parents were busy elsewhere, every time she'd handed me a task instead of an apology for their absence. "Peel these. Watch this. Don't let it break." I'd taken it as chores. It was an apprenticeship, and she'd hidden it inside affection so I'd never feel like an obligation the way she must have known I felt everywhere else. Hartwell wasn't finished. He wanted me to understand what a signature does and doesn't do. "This starts the clock," he said. "Due diligence, brand work, retail development. Nothing hits a shelf overnight. And I want to be clear about that, so no one in your family later says we rushed a confused woman. This is months of work." He paused. "But the relaunch, the public piece, that can happen in weeks. We'd bring the line home. Here. A Bluebird homecoming, at the diner, so the town that made it can taste it first." My grandmother signed the first page. The pen moved slow and certain. She signed the second, the one with my name on it, and she set the pen down between us like it was a thing she wanted me to keep, not a thing she was done with. The 2 men gathered their copies and stood. Pierce shook her hand with both of his. When the door closed behind them, Grandma stood at the window and watched their car pull out onto the road. "You'll come back angry," she said to me. "Not them. You. Give it a day. She was wrong about the day. She was right about everything else. My phone buzzed again on the counter, and this time I looked. A screenshot had landed in the family chat, forwarded by my mother, or maybe forwarded on purpose, from a number saved in Grandma's phone as Loretta from next door. 2 men in suits at Harriet's this morning, out-of-state plates. Thought you'd want to know. Under it, my mother had typed a reply and then deleted it, replaced by 3 dots that pulsed and stopped, pulsed and stopped. Somewhere 1,500 miles away, in a lodge full of champagne, my parents had just found out that strangers had been in what my mother called Mom's house. And under that, a private message from Sloan to me. She was typing. The 3 dots came up. They went away. They came up again. Whatever she wanted to say, she couldn't finish it. That mattered more than I knew. To understand why any of them cared so much, you have to understand the diner, and why my family spent their whole lives ashamed of the best thing about them. My grandfather Earl opened the Bluebird in 1990, the year before I was born. He painted the front door blue because Grandma told him to. Paint it blue, she'd said. People remember blue. He did, and they did. For 31 years that blue door opened before the sun, and the coffee was on before the door was unlocked, and the whole town cycled through those booths. First dates, job interviews, the morning after funerals, when nobody could face their own kitchen. There's a booth in the corner where 3 generations of one family got proposed to. The Bluebird wasn't a business to this town, it was a room they all shared. My grandfather knew every regular's order and half their secrets. He'd carry a plate to a booth, set it down, say the one thing that person needed to hear that morning, and move on before they could thank him. When the plant across this county laid off 200 people one winter, the Bluebird quietly fed a lot of families who couldn't quite pay, and nobody ever said a word about it, because Earl kept a running tab in his head and forgave most of it. That was the business my parents were ashamed of. That was the diner my father called an embarrassment at dinner parties. I used to think he was just a snob. I understand now it was worse than that. You have to already be planning to sell something to work that hard at being ashamed of it. Grandma cooked. Grandpa ran the floor and told the same 6 jokes for 3 decades, and somehow they never stopped landing. And the recipes lived in the blue notebook, and the notebook lived in whatever apron pocket my grandmother happened to be wearing, and no one else was ever trusted with it. Not even the cooks she trained for 20 years. Grandpa died in 2020. I was there. It was fast, and it was a Tuesday, and the diner closed for exactly 1 day before Grandma opened it again, because she said Earl would have been furious to see it dark. She kept his chair in the corner of the diner kitchen and never let anyone sit in it. She kept his apron on the hook by the walk-in even after she scaled the place down and let a manager run the day-to-day. When the grief snuck up on her, she'd say, "He'd have flown to no party, he'd have stayed." I didn't understand how much she meant it until the frozen dinner. My father grew up in that kitchen and spent his adult life pretending he hadn't. Dennis wanted to be the kind of man whose mother was retired, not the kind whose mother ran a diner. I heard my mother coach him once, years ago, at a work function, her hand light on his sleeve. "Tell people your mother's retired," she said. "Don't say diner." I was 16, and I stood there holding a tray of somebody else's appetizers, and I understood that they were embarrassed of the woman who fed half the county. Grandma knew what they thought of it. She told me so that morning, while we cleaned up the coffee cups after the men left, and it was the first crack in the story I thought I understood. "I let them believe the deal died last fall," she said. "Ashford came to me in the autumn. Dennis found out somehow, tried to make himself the middleman, and when it didn't work the way he wanted, I let him think the whole thing fell apart. People relax when they think they've won." She dried a cup and set it in the rack. "They booked their week in Aspen because they were sure there was nothing here left to watch." I thought about the timing, the party a week long, the house empty, the signing set for the one morning she knew, to a certainty, that all of them would be 1,000 miles away. And I remembered something Sloan had said at Thanksgiving, tossed off between the potatoes and the pie, laughing. Mom already promised Bluebird to us. I hadn't thought about it since. Promised. As if my grandmother were a piece of furniture you inherit, a thing to be assigned. As if her whole life were a line item in someone else's plan. Sloan was marrying into the Wade family, and the Wades ran a hospitality group, restaurants and resorts up and down the state. And I understood, standing at the sink with the dish towel, exactly what my parents had wanted. They had wanted the Bluebird to flow. Through Sloan, through the wedding, into the Wades. My grandmother had just sent it somewhere they couldn't reach, and put my name on the door. That was when I heard the car in the drive. Not the men's car. A rental, taken fast around the turn. My parents had cut their week in Aspen down to a day and a half, and they were home. Dennis came through the unlocked door without knocking, which is a thing about my father you should hold on to. He didn't knock at his own mother's house because he'd stopped thinking of it as hers. "We flew back for this," he said, before he'd even set his bag down. His eyes went to the table, to the folder copies stacked neatly where the men had left them. "What did you let her sign?" My mother came in behind him, still in her travel clothes, and her eyes found the blue notebook, which Grandma had set out on the table on purpose, and my mother's face went the color of dishwater. "That book belongs to this family," Dennis said, "not to her whims." "It's her book," I said. "She wrote it, every page." He didn't look at me. He rarely does when there's a decision to be won. He looked at his mother, and Grandma looked back at him with the steadiness of someone who has been waiting a very long time for this exact conversation and has decided not to flinch when it finally comes. "You're tired, Mom," Dennis said, and his voice went soft and reasonable, and that was somehow worse. "You've been alone too much. People take advantage of that. Let me look at what they had you sign. Let me protect you." "I've been alone," she agreed. "Because you left me alone. Yesterday. With a box you didn't even heat." Dennis changed tactics. He does this. When force doesn't work, he reaches for sorrow. He pulled out a chair and sat down across from her, uninvited, and folded his hands like a man in church. "You raised me better than to think I'd hurt you," he said. "I'm trying to keep this family together. That's all I've ever tried to do." My grandmother looked at him for a long moment, and I saw something move behind her eyes, 10 years of something. And she said only, "You have a strange way of keeping things together, Dennis." He didn't understand what she meant. I did, later. She was talking about 2016, and he didn't even know she knew. My mother took my arm and pulled me out onto the porch, away from the two of them, and dropped her voice into the register she uses when she's about to reframe reality. "You have no idea what you've done," she said. "I didn't do anything. She made a decision." "She's confused, Karin." My mother said it gently, like a diagnosis, like love. "She's 79 years old. Strangers show up, they flatter her, they get her to sign things she doesn't understand. You should have called us the second they walked in. We're her family. We're protecting her. That's all this is." There it was. Confused. Protecting. The two words they were going to build their whole case on, and I could already see the shape of it. I kept my voice level, because I've learned that the calmer I am, the less they can call me hysterical. "Then why?" I said. "Did you leave her a frozen dinner you never even heated?" My mother didn't answer. Her jaw worked, and no words came, and inside I could hear Dennis's phone ringing on speaker, and it was Sloan, still in Aspen, and her voice came through thin and uncertain. "Mom, is this the thing you swore Grandma would never actually do? The thing you swore she'd never do?" My sister knew something. She'd known before any of this that there was a thing, a specific thing, that my parents had been reassuring each other for years would never happen. My father heard it too, and he ended the call mid-sentence, cutting his favorite daughter off in front of me because she'd said one word too many. Then he came out onto the porch and gave me the version of himself he thinks is reasonable. "Sign it back," he said. "Whatever she gave you, sign it back to the family. Or we tell people she wasn't in her right mind when she did it. And we let a doctor decide that for her. You don't want your grandmother's name dragged through that. Neither do I." He said it like a favor, like he was sparing us both something. That night, at Grandma's kitchen table, my phone rang from a number I didn't know. I almost let it go. I answered because I answer. "You don't know me," a woman's voice said. "My name's Frances Cole. Franny. I worked the counter at the Bluebird for 22 years. A breath. There's something you should know about your father. From a long time back." My parents' whole strategy fit in 2 words, and I want to be precise about them, because they were going to spend the next several weeks trying to make them true. Confused. Stealing. The morning after they came home, I sat in Grandma's kitchen with the frozen box still on the counter where I'd left it as a kind of exhibit, and I finally did the math out loud that I'd been doing in my head. The receipt on that box read 7:52 in the morning. My mother's first Aspen photo, the boarding gate, was posted at 9:10. They had been in this house at 7:52, and there was no version of "We Got Stuck" that survived a timestamp and a boarding gate photo an hour apart. I said as much to my father when he came by to press me again, and I watched him decide, in real time, to change the subject. "Nobody's talking about the dinner," he said. "We're talking about a woman who used a vulnerable old lady to grab everything for herself. That woman was me." And by that afternoon, it was everywhere. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in a year texted me a paragraph that started, "I don't want to take sides, but..." An aunt sent me a screenshot of a message my mother had sent to the extended family thread. "Karen's using Grandma to grab everything. We're heartbroken." The word heartbroken did a lot of work. A woman I'd gone to high school with, who I hadn't thought about in a decade, messaged to say she'd heard what was going on and hoped I'd do the right thing. That's how fast a story travels when the people telling it are practiced at telling it. It reached my kitchen in Columbus, too. My boss called me into his office, kind but careful, and asked if there was a family situation he should know about, because someone had emailed the restaurant a long message about my character. I told him the truth in 4 sentences, and he believed me, because I've worked for him for 6 years, and my parents have known him for none. But I stood in that office afterward and understood what they were willing to do. They were willing to come for my job to protect a story they'd already lost. It made me careful. It made me keep everything. So I did what I do, which is not shout. I gathered. I asked Grandma if she still had the emails from the fall, from when Ashford first reached out. And she did. Printed, in a folder of her own, because my grandmother has never trusted a screen to keep anything for her. And in that folder was a printout of an email my father had sent to Ashford in October, over her head, without her knowing, and I read it twice to be sure of what I was seeing. "As the family's representative," my father had written, "I'll be handling my mother's affairs going forward. Please direct all correspondence to me." The family's representative. He'd tried to insert himself between my grandmother and the buyer, to make himself the gate everything had to pass through. Ashford had written back 2 lines, polite and final. They'd been instructed to deal with Mrs. Hills directly and would honor her wishes alone. That was the moment my father learned a deal was real, and that was why he'd flown home so fast. And it also raised a question I couldn't shake. If my father was this hungry, this willing to go behind his own mother, then why had he kept the whole thing so quiet all these months? Why hide it instead of fighting it in the open, where he was so much better at winning? Meanwhile, the confused old lady threat sat over everything, and I braced for it to become a real fight. A doctor, a court, a year of my grandmother's dignity on trial. It didn't. Grandma handled it in about a minute. She took an envelope from the same folder and slid it across the table. Inside was a letter from her doctor, dated a month earlier, February, a full cognitive assessment. Clear, sharp, competent to make her own decisions, in the plain language doctors use when they want a document to hold. "Let them whisper," she said. "I saw a doctor last month. On purpose. On purpose." She had walked into that appointment in February knowing this exact accusation was coming, and she'd diffused it before it was ever spoken out loud. My father's biggest threat was already dead in a drawer. I looked at my grandmother across her kitchen table and revised, again, everything I thought I understood about how far ahead of all of us she'd been. She caught the look on my face, and she wasn't done. "The book is only half of what they should be afraid of," she said. I didn't understand that yet. I was about to. "Before I tell you what my father did years ago, I want to ask you something, and I want you to actually answer it. If you'd been in my grandmother's place and you found out what she found out, would you have forgiven your own child? Or would you have kept quiet and watched, the way she did, for years? Put it in the comments. Hold your answer. You'll want it in a minute." The next day, I drove out to meet Franny Cole. She'd asked me to come to the diner, and she was waiting in the back booth. A woman in her 60s with flour permanently under her nails and a face that had served 10,000 breakfasts. She had a coffee poured for me before I sat down. Then she put a piece of paper on the table between us and turned it face down first, like she needed a second before she showed me the front of it. "Your dad tried to sell these recipes once," she said, "years back, and somebody in this family signed off on staying quiet about it." She turned the paper over. It was an old order ticket, the kind the diner used to run, green and thin, and on the back, in a careful hand, was a note. A date, 2016, and a line. "D called Halbrook Re, Bluebird Recipes. They wanted the book." Halbrook Foods, Ashford's competitor, the other name in the grocery aisle. "I took that call by accident," Franny said. "Picked up the diner line one morning and the call was already patched somewhere, and I heard enough before I hung up. Your dad wanted to sell your grandmother's recipes to Halbrook. Out from under her, while she was still standing at that stove every day. He'd have taken the book right out of her apron if he could have gotten his hands on it." "Why didn't it happen?" I asked. Franny's face softened into something like grief. "Because Harriet found out. She found out, and she stopped it cold, and then she did the thing that costs the most. She looked at me. She chose to keep her son. She never chose to trust him again. 10 years, Karen. She's known for 10 years, and she never said a word to anybody, because saying it would have meant losing him, and she just lost your grandfather and she wasn't ready to lose anybody else." I sat with that. 10 years. A decade of Sunday dinners and cataract appointments and my father calling her confused, and the whole time she had known exactly who he was and had chosen, at her own expense, to keep the peace. It reframed every gentle thing I'd ever watched her do. Her tolerance wasn't weakness. Her patience wasn't fog. It was a wound she'd been dressing quietly, alone, for 10 years, so that the rest of us could keep pretending we were a family. "She used to watch him at Sunday dinner," Franny said, "the way you watch weather you know is coming. Polite. Ready. She fed him every week for 10 years and never once let him see she'd stopped believing a word he said. I don't know how she did it. I couldn't have." Franny wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "But I'll tell you what I think she was really doing all that time. I think she was waiting for the day she'd know for certain which of you two girls was which. And I think your birthday finally told her." Franny reached into her bag and set down one more thing. A photocopy. A single page. Faded. A draft agreement from 2016. Never completed. At the top, in the cold language of contracts, Party A. Dennis Hills, transfer of proprietary recipes. My father's name, in black and white, next to the exact crime he was now accusing me of committing. I almost missed the last detail. In the corner of the page on a CC line, a set of initials, SH Sloan Hills. My sister was 19 in 2016, and her initials were on the copy line of the document my father tried to bury. I understood then the shape of the whole thing. This wasn't a single bad decision my father had made in a hard year. It was a pattern. In 2016, he'd tried to sell the recipes to a competitor. In 2026, he'd tried to route them through my sister's marriage into the Wades. The same theft. A nicer suit. And my grandmother, who had watched him do it the first time and swallowed it whole, had spent a decade quietly making sure that when he tried again, she'd be the one holding the pen. That night, Sloan texted me. Not the family thread. Just me. Can we talk? Alone? Before the homecoming. We met at a diner that wasn't ours. Neutral ground, a chain place off the highway where nobody knew either of us, and my sister looked like she hadn't slept in days. She'd flown home from Aspen. The engagement party had ended, and something else had started in its place. I knew, she said, before I could even ask. About 2016. I was 19. Dad looped me in because he needed someone in the family to look loyal, someone to see, and I told myself it wasn't my problem. It was between him and Grandma. Her voice cracked and she didn't try to hide it. It was my problem. She's my grandmother too. I just liked being the one they didn't ask anything of. It was easier to be the favorite than to be honest. I didn't rescue her from it. I let her sit in it. Because she'd let Grandma sit in it for 10 years. Then Sloan reached into her bag and put something on the table. Not a photocopy. The original of the 2016 page with my father's actual signature, the real ink. Franny gave you the copy? She said. I've had the real one since I was 19. I don't even know why I kept it. Maybe so that someday I could do this. She slid it across the table to me. Do what I couldn't. I brought both pages to Grandma. I told her everything. The ticket, the copy, the original, Sloan's initials, Sloan's confession. I asked her what she wanted to do. Whether she wanted lawyers, whether she wanted to make Dennis pay in the way the law makes people pay, with filings and hearings and his name in a docket. She thought about it for a long time, turning her coffee cup a quarter turn on the table, the way she does when she's deciding something she's already mostly decided. No courtrooms, she said. I'm too old to spend a year of the time I've got left in a beige room, watching lawyers argue about whether I know my own mind. She looked at me. Ashford's bringing the line home in a few weeks. A homecoming, at the diner. The whole town's invited. Let the town see who cooked and who tried to sell. That's the only jury I want. So we waited for the homecoming. And on the morning of it, my parents walked into the Bluebird in their best clothes, smiling at the neighbors, shaking hands, certain they still controlled the room. The diner hadn't looked that full in years. Ashford had turned the homecoming into something the whole town was invited to, and the whole town came. Maybe 80 people packed into the booths and standing 3 deep along the counter, plus a reporter from the county paper with a notebook, and a photographer setting up in the corner. There were samples out on trays, the first prototypes of the retail line, packaged in blue, my grandmother's name across the front in a script that looked like her handwriting because it was her handwriting, scanned right off a page of the notebook. Dalton Pierce stood up by the register to say a few words. Everything you'll taste today started in this kitchen, he said, and he gestured at the walls, the blue door, the corner where Earl's chair still sat. The shelves come later. The story starts now. He raised a small blue package. We're not putting a factory's name on this. We're putting hers, and she'll have a say in every batch, for as long as she wants it, and after that, someone she trusts will. And that was when my father asked to say something. He crossed the room and took the little microphone before anyone could tell him no, and he turned to face his neighbors with the easy confidence of a man who has never once, in his whole life, been caught. We've always protected Mom, he said, warm, aggrieved, perfect. Some people just saw an opportunity, His eyes touched me for half a second. It's a hard thing, watching someone move in on a person you love, someone who isn't as sharp as she used to be. The room shifted toward him. He was good. He'd been rehearsing this face his whole life. I hadn't planned to speak, but my grandmother put her hand flat on my back once and left it there, and I stood up. "You didn't get stuck," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. The room turned. "On her birthday, you keep telling people you got stuck at the airport that it couldn't be helped." I held up the grocery receipt. "This is time-stamped 7:52 that morning. You were in her house at 7:52. You left a frozen dinner on her table and you didn't even heat it, and then you flew to Aspen and posted a photo an hour later." A murmur moved through the booths. My father's smile held, but it cost him something to hold it now. "That's a private family matter," he said. "This isn't the place." "And this," I said, and I held up the email, "is you, last October, writing to Ashford, calling yourself the family's representative, trying to put yourself between your mother and her own decision. They told you no. That's why you hid it." "That's a business misunderstanding," Dennis said into the microphone, and it was the wrong tone, too fast and too high, and the room heard it. So I held up the last page, the 2016 draft, with his name at the top. I let the room see it before I said anything. "In 2016, I said, you tried to sell her recipes to Halbrook, to a competitor, behind her back, while she was still standing at that stove every single day." I let it sit for a beat. "You are standing in her diner, holding her microphone, accusing me of stealing the exact thing you already tried to sell." The murmur became something with weight now, a low sound moving through 80 people who had eaten in this room their whole lives. I saw faces I'd known my whole life doing math. Loretta from next door, who'd sent the text that started all of it, had a hand over her mouth. The old man in the corner booth had set down his fork. The reporter had stopped writing and was just watching my father now, which is worse, for a man like my father, than any question. He had built a whole life on being the reasonable one in every room. The room had just quietly decided he wasn't. The reporter was writing fast. My father opened his mouth, and for a moment nothing came out. Because there was nothing to say. And I watched Dennis Hills lose control of a room he was standing in the middle of for the first time in my life. Then Sloan stood up. She walked to the counter and she took the microphone out of our father's hand, gently, the way you take something from a person who's about to drop it. And she set the original 2016 page down on the counter, in front of Grandma, where the reporter and the neighbors and the photographer could all see it. "I knew," Sloan said. Her voice shook and she let it shake. "I was 19, and I knew, and I stayed quiet because it was easier. Because I liked being the favorite more than I liked being honest." She looked at Grandma. "I'm sorry. I should have stayed too." My mother crossed the room and took my father by the arm and pulled him toward the door, her chin up, still performing dignity, and the two of them left the Bluebird through that blue door with the whole town watching them go. Nobody moved to stop them. Nobody moved to follow. The silence they walked out into was its own kind of verdict. Grandma stood up. She took the microphone last and she did not raise her voice, because she never has. "I'm 79, she said. "I'm not confused." She let the room hold that. "I know exactly who stayed." She looked at me across all those people and she lifted the blue notebook off the counter and held it up, just slightly, toward me. Not a speech. Just a hand, and a book, and a room full of witnesses. An old man in the corner booth, a customer from the diner's earliest days, took a bite of one of the samples, chewed and said, to no one and everyone, "Tastes like 1995 in here. Tastes like home." I need to say something to you directly, before I tell you how it ended. If there's someone in your life who has quietly stayed, a grandparent, a parent, the one who shows up and does the work, and never once gets the invitation, don't wait for a room full of people to finally notice them. Share this with them today. Tell them that staying was never invisible to you, even if it was invisible to everyone else. Because that's the whole thing. That's what my parents never understood. The deal closed in the middle of May. Clean, on my grandmother's terms, and no one else's. The rumors about me died the way rumors die, quietly and without apology, once the people spreading them had been seen for exactly what they were. The retail line was still months from a real shelf, the way Hartwell had promised it would be, but it was hers now, protected, with my name on the page that kept it that way. My father asked to meet. I almost didn't go. I went because I wanted to hear what he'd learned, and the answer was nothing. "We're still family," he said, over coffee he didn't drink. "There's enough to share, Karin. Nobody has to walk away from anybody. Let's just be reasonable." "You said that in 2016 too," I said. "There's enough to share. Right before you tried to take all of it." He didn't have an answer for that. There isn't one. He tried a few more shapes of the same sentence. Family, reasonable, enough, and I let each one land and go nowhere. I set the boundary the way my grandmother taught me to do everything, plainly, without heat. "You're welcome at the table," I told him, "when you considered it honestly, not before." Then I ended the call, and I did not feel powerful, and I did not feel like I'd won. I felt like I'd finally stopped explaining my family to people, which is its own kind of quiet, and maybe the better kind. The county paper ran its story that weekend. It was careful and factual, and it didn't need to editorialize, because the facts did the work themselves. It mentioned the birthday. It mentioned the frozen dinner and the boarding gate photo an hour apart. It mentioned 2016 without ever naming Holbrook, because the reporter was kinder than my father deserved. My mother called it a hit piece. Everyone else called it Tuesday's paper. In a town this size, a thing like that doesn't ruin you. It just relocates you. My parents used to be the family with the retired mother and the daughter marrying into money. Now they're the ones who left Harriet a frozen dinner on her 79th birthday. That's the sentence attached to them now. In line at the pharmacy, at the hardware store. They earned every word of it. Not everyone came to my side of it. That's the part nobody tells you. Some of the relatives went silent and stayed silent. An aunt still calls my mother the wronged one. A cousin told me I'd humiliated the family, as if the humiliation had started with me and not at a boarding gate at 9 in the morning. I let them believe what they need to. I'm done arguing with people who decided the ending before they read the story. Sloan was different. Sloan actually asked, and she came to the diner and asked with her voice low, "Is the door really still open for me?" Grandma answered that one herself. "You can earn your way back into this kitchen," she said, "one shift at a time." Not forgiveness handed over like a party favor. A door left open a crack, with the work of walking through it left entirely to Sloan. My sister took an apron off the hook the next morning and showed up for the early shift, and she's shown up every week since, and Grandma still corrects her grip on the knife the way she once corrected mine. Then my grandmother looked at me. "There's one more thing," she said, "that I never gave you properly." It was a few weeks later, near the end of May, when she gave it to me. She handed me a letter first, folded in her handwriting, dated the 14th of March, her birthday, the night I stayed. "My wish was simple," she'd written, "to be remembered by the one who stayed. You made it come true before you knew it." I remembered the candles. "A real one," I'd told her. "Make a real wish." And she'd said she already had, and that I'd see. Then she went to the hutch, and she opened the locked drawer and she took out the blue notebook, and this time she didn't open it to show me a single page. She put the whole thing in my hands and closed my fingers around it. "It was never about who owns it," she said. "It's about who keeps it alive." I opened the cover. On the first page, in ink that hadn't been there before, was a new recipe in her hand, added recently, the letters a little less steady than the older ones on the pages beneath. At the top, she'd written 2 words. For Karen. On the counter of the reopened diner, there's a small blue package now, a prototype, the first of the line, with the word coming across the front in that script that's really her handwriting. I keep the old frozen dinner box more in my mind than in my kitchen, but I think about it every time I look at that package. They left her something frozen, cold in the middle, on the table that fed half the town. She's leaving the world something warm, and it's only getting started. We cooked that night, the 3 of us. Grandma at the pass, calling it the way she used to. Me on the line. And Sloan, on her first real shift, tying on an apron and letting the gravy break and being told, without any softness at all, to do it again. I found the box of candles in the drawer with the string and the rubber bands, and I lit the few that were left over from March. And we ate a real meal at the same table where they'd left the frozen one, in a kitchen that smelled, once more, like the best food in the county. The people who only show up when the lights are on never learn what the dark is for. My grandmother did. And when it mattered, she let me stay.